Welcome everybody today. Thank you for joining us on today's webinar for the second in our webinar series of Park Perspectives, bilingual webinar series brought to you by Park People and the Government of Canada. My name is Rachel Yanchishin. I'm with Park People and I will be your moderator today. With me today I have Minaz Asani Kanji and Nawal Atik. We will be speaking with both of them shortly. So I just wanted to bring some technical notes. I hope everyone can see and hear us all right. You can adjust your volume or your screens, or if you can hear me all right. What we're going to be using with this webinar is the chat function because we want people to feel free to ask questions and participate throughout the webinar. So we're going to be using the chat function in this program. So if you move your mouse over your screen, you'll see a few options at the bottom, and there's a chat option, so you can just click on that, and that gives you the option to just ask a question or chime in if we are asking questions. Feel free to chat with us at any point. So today's session is also going to be recorded. We're going to have this available on our website for later reference. And it'd be interesting actually already to just see who we have with us today. Maybe if you could just pop into the chat window and let us know where you're participating from, because this is a national network program. So if you want to let us know where you're attending from, that would be great. You can just pop that into the chat window. So we've got people from Toronto, Brampton, we have some folks from Calgary, Scarborough, Parksville, BC, awesome. City of London, Vancouver, fantastic. Burlington, so that's wonderful. So we've got a great national network here already. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna introduce our first panelist, Minaz Asani Kanji. So Minaz is a manager of outreach at Park People. She works with diverse communities across Toronto to help them animate their parks and green spaces. She manages many programs, and among them is the Sparking Change program, which is what we'll be talking about today. So now I will pass the microphone over to you, Minaz.
Thank you so much, Rachel. I'm very excited to be presenting this webinar because I get to share a program that I work on every day and that I'm really passionate about. I'm very curious to see who's on the other side of this computer. So Rachel's already asked you what cities you're from, but if you could add to that list what parks and communities you're connected to, what brings you here, what do you have to share? I hope this webinar can be a conversation where we share what we know collectively. So currently, how many people do we have, Rachel, on here? Okay, so we're 28, 67 people did register for this. So we're really excited to be sharing this webinar with you. I want to say thank you to all of you for joining today. Your being here demonstrates that you care about parks and communities in Canada. We're happy to share our insights on park engagement in underserved communities and answer your questions. As I mentioned, we do hope, however, that some of you have some knowledge or experience in this field, and we'll share that know-how as we go along through the chat window. We'll get started with who Park People is. I'm always curious about who at a presentation has heard of Park People before. So I'm going to ask you to raise your hands, and the way to do that is that little hand you see on your screens. If you don't mind clicking on that little hand, if you've heard of Park People before this webinar. Twelve, 13, 14. Okay, so about half the people that are on this webinar have heard of Park People before. Now, if you could raise your hand by clicking that same icon, If you've worked with park people in some capacity, maybe you've got a grant from us or partnered with us, used our resources, are part of the parks network on our website. So if you could raise your hand. Okay, so about a third of you, which is great. Okay, so today, 86% of Canadians live in cities. This rapid densification is set to continue. The potential of parks to offset many of the challenges of urban life makes parks more relevant now than ever before. Parks are the places where we gather to play, to exercise, to relax, and to connect with each other and with nature. You can feel the energy of a vibrant park reverberate across a whole neighborhood. You can think about vibrant parks in your own cities. And if you'd like to share what they are, please type them in your chat box now. Let's see what vibrant parks you have in your cities across the country. Princess Island in Calgary. I was just there in the summer. That's really great. It is a really vibrant park. I saw Shakespeare in the park there. Trinity Bellwoods. So if you live in Toronto, you know Trinity Bellwoods. Thompson Memorial in Scarborough is a great park. Flemingdon Park, and we're going to hear lots about Flemingdon Park today. Gage Park in Brampton, Christie Pitts in Toronto. Great. So we have really great, vibrant parks across the city. You can see and measure the benefits of a vibrant park system on an entire city's health, economy, ecology, and social well-being. This is the power of parks, and it is created by people who are committed to making a real, lasting difference in their community and city. Park People's work is all about supporting and mobilizing people to help them activate the power of parks, and as a result, to improve the quality of life in cities across Canada. We have a slogan we've used since the organization started. When people get involved, parks get better. And we believe it in that slogan as much today as we did when we started in 2011. So we're going to present what you're all here about today, the Sparking Change program. Please, so another participation question. If you could please raise your hand if you've heard about the Sparking Change program, the Sparking Change report, or Park People's work in underserved communities. Okay, we've got about 6 people. That's about, is that 5%? 10%. Okay, we've gone up to 8. So about 8, a quarter of you have heard about it. So not a whole lot. As I talk about this program, we'd love to hear any Sparking Change stories from your cities. Please share them in the chat box. Sparking Change tells a story of underserved communities that have taken action to become more engaged in their local parks through spearheading improvements, engaging diverse community members, and organizing events and activities that draw people into the park. Park People started the Sparking Change program 5 years ago. With the challenge of inequality in our cities, it was really important for us to understand how parks could play a role in creating more inclusive and equitable spaces. We launched the TD Park Builders program in 2014, and over 4 years collaborated with 50 groups in underserved communities. Through that program, we encouraged community engagement and animation of parks and green spaces. We provided micro grants of between $500 and $5,000. And along with the funding, we also provided ongoing support. You will hear, Nawal will talk about that support when she speaks. In 2017, we released the Sparking Change report, which explores the social impacts that result when communities in underserved neighborhoods spark change in their local park. And the picture that's on your screen now is actually the picture from our Sparking Change report. To create the report, we had conversations with 24 community members, nonprofit staff, and city staff in 7 North American cities, which included Toronto, Edmonton, Winnipeg, Los Angeles, New York, Austin, and Portland. Over these next 3 years, so 2018 to 2020, we will collaborate with 31 groups in Toronto's underserved communities. We continue our Sparking Change work because we've seen how well-used parks are a vital element for a strong community. When residents get involved, they can turn their green spaces into vibrant neighborhood hubs that promote social gathering and cultural exchange, and where people feel a sense of community, safety, and belonging. Okay, so that picture is a park called Broadacres Park in Maybell, in Etobicoke in West Toronto, with a group called Maybell Arts, which is an arts organization that works in a Toronto community, a social housing building in Toronto. And this was an Arts in the Park event where it was 3 years ago when the Syrian refugees came in, and they had this program where they invited the Syrian refugees and partnered with the Arab Community Center, which works with, worked with the Syrian refugees. So they brought them in and had this beautiful Arts in the Park program where they engaged local residents with the new Syrian refugees that had come in a park setting. And so that picture is creating, taking the natural environment in the park and creating like art pieces. And it was like a whole afternoon of really wonderful programming. Okay, anyone shared anything in the chat box? I do encourage you to keep sharing any stories. If any of this relates with work that you're doing across the country, we'd really love to hear about it. So parks are powerful places of social connection. If you've been to Toronto, you may know that this is Hyde Park in Toronto, and this is the cherry blossoms. Thousands of people go to Hyde Park during cherry blossom season. The environmental, physical, mental, and health benefits of parks are well documented. But Sparking Change looks at how parks are powerful places of social connection and what the social benefits of parks are. Parks provide an open, accessible place for social gathering and are strongly linked to memory, history, and culture. They are important sites for community development. In parks, residents take action to improve the economic, social, cultural, and environmental conditions in their neighborhood. The benefits of parks are particularly important for people who are living on lower incomes, newcomers, seniors, and other vulnerable populations, including residents in some high-rise tower communities who often live in cramped conditions and who have little or no private outdoor space. These populations are often more dependent on neighborhood ties within their communities, and so social connection is really important for them. Okay. Through our Sparking Change research and interviews, we came up with 5 major social impacts of park engagement in underserved neighborhoods. This is what you see on your screens right now. Linked to each of these impacts are strategies or actions that community members, nonprofits, and municipal governments can take to achieve these impacts. I'm going to speak to each of these 5 impacts in a bit more detail, and Nawal will speak about some of the strategies that her group has taken. Again, I invite you to share in the chat window names of specific parks in your cities where these impacts have been seen, so that we can learn from each other's examples. So the first social impact is creating a sense of change and shared ownership. Becoming involved in a local park can foster a sense of possibility, creating momentum for change that can galvanize others. Building a positive vision for a park helps volunteers and others in the neighborhood transform parks that were perceived as boring or unsafe into beautiful, inviting places of neighborhood pride. Every city, I'm sure, has these parks that are deemed dangerous or unsafe. And usually people don't know what to do with these parks. So the picture that you see on the screen is a story from our Sparking Change report. It's Lucia Ponte and her friends of Soundview Park in the Bronx in New York City. At first, when she wanted to do something in the park, people in the neighborhood weren't interested in getting involved in the park that was seen as dangerous and dirty. She, however, focused on the big picture, not just what was in the park then, and she started off by organizing small events in the park. Having a visible presence in the park can change perceptions and encourages others to get involved. This doesn't happen overnight, though. It is a process. All these changes do take time. Can anyone relate to this and want to share a story of a similar park in your city? Okay, well, you can always share while we're going through this. Type your stories in the chat box. So the second social impact for park engagement is building confidence and inspiring civic leaders. For many people we spoke with for the research, volunteering for a park group was the first step in more community organizing and civic engagement overall. From this first step, people went on to sit on community boards, participated in political campaigns, connected with residents in other parts of the city, or created relationship with city staff. An example of this is the Friends of Regent Park in Toronto, where members visited City Hall to speak to councillors about the city's poverty reduction strategy. The third social impact of park engagement is reducing social isolation and creating inclusive communities. And I'm sure a lot of you can relate to this specific social impact. People want parks to be inviting and places to bring neighbors together. But this doesn't happen on its own. There needs to be programming that is relevant and fun. We at Park People have particularly heard this from those who live in tower communities in Toronto. And one of the best ways we heard to do this is opportunities around food, whether through growing, cooking, or selling food. Food really brings people together. And Nawal will speak about this when she speaks. I want to elaborate on this picture. It really is a lovely picture and I use a lot in my presentations. Can you raise your hands if you have heard of pumpkin parades? Okay, great. So about a third of you. So for those who haven't, I'm just going to give you a quick synopsis of what a pumpkin parade is. They're an event that started about 12 years ago in Toronto. Residents bring out their pumpkins into the park on November 1st after Halloween, and the community comes out to see the parade of pumpkins lit up at night. In tower communities, however, people don't buy pumpkins. So we've tried a different method of hosting pumpkin parades. This picture was taken with the Jane and Finch Boys and Girls Club. So we partnered with 3 of their locations and they brought out 100 kids who carved pumpkins in the afternoon. In the evening, they had pizza in the park. And as the sun set, they walked their pumpkins into the park. So they had a parade and then the pumpkins had a parade. And then they invited the community to come out for their pumpkin parade. It was really lovely to see people in the park at night in a community that is often seen as dangerous. People peering down from their balconies was also quite lovely to see. So it wasn't just the people who were in the park, it was also the people in the apartments that were partaking in this event. So Julie, Julie Michaud has shared that St. Julian Park in the City of London active community group has worked with the city for 20 years, involved in naturalization programs, an annual fair, and activities for youth programming. That's great. That sounds like a really animated and engaged park. So please keep sharing your stories. That's great. I think everyone would love to hear about each other's stories. So I'll go on to the fourth social impact of park engagement, which is providing a space for diverse people to gather. So while parks can be a powerful place for healing, exchange, and dialogue, it is important that the conditions are created to ensure that everyone can participate. We need to include people of different cultural and ethnic backgrounds, but also youth, newcomers, older adults, and Indigenous people. The fifth and final social impact of park engagement is supporting local economic development. We often think of how parks increase nearby property values, but parks can offer many economic benefits on a smaller scale to people living in the community. For example, so this story is in our Sparking Change report. This is Cully Park in Portland, where 10% of wages for the development of a new park went to people who live in the surrounding neighborhoods. And 70% of the contracts went to minority and women-owned businesses. Community members were also paid to participate in the process of environmental assessment for the park, which was a former landfill. Economic benefits can also evolve around food. For example, people can save on their grocery bills by participating in a community garden, and some could even sell excess produce at a farmer's market. In Toronto's RV Burgess Park in the Thorncliffe neighborhood, a shipping container cafe is staffed by a local women's group, resulting in employment opportunities. Economic impacts can also be less direct, so coming in the form of building skills, networking opportunities, as we will hear from Nawal. And on that note, I would like to introduce Nawal Atiq. She is the chair and the founding member of the Flemingdon Community Support Services. She lived in the Flemingdon community for many years. Nawal works for a social service agency in the neighborhood and has a diverse background in education, business, and immigrant support. She is a committed volunteer and has participated in numerous organizations since her arrival in Canada from Pakistan. I've known Nawal for about 4 years now, and I'm always amazed at what a great community leader she is, and I am really excited about for you to hear from her. Here's Nawal.
Thank you, Minaz. Thank you so much for that amazing introduction. I would like to start with some background on the area. Flemingdon Park is one of the largest high-rise communities in Toronto with over 22,000 inhabitants. Flemingdon Park has been referred to as an arrival city since most of our residents are new immigrants. It is a very diverse community with different cultures, languages, ethnic backgrounds. All these conditions in a community means that it can take time to build trust. Due to language, financial, and cultural barriers, many of the women in our community bear the burden of care for children and elders and often experience isolation and lack a sense of belonging. The Flemingdon Community Support Services, or FCSS, began in 2013 as an initiative of the Flemingdon Food Access Project. Several people in the group wanted to start an initiative that focused on animating our park to help lessen the isolation many in the community were experiencing. With support from park people, the Flemingdon Park Ministry, Flemingdon Health Center, and the neighborhood organization, Flemingdon Community Support Services was born. There is a core group of 25 to 30 volunteers who are very active. We received our first grant in 2013. It was a TD Park Builders grant through Park People to do 3 simple events in the park to bring people out of their apartments and into the public green space. People began to get used to having things happen in the park. We had our first park cleanup in 2014, and that went really well. A year later, we had our second park cleanup, and over 200 people of all ages participated. This annual event is now so well attended that our local councillor said it was the most successful cleanup he had ever seen. In 2014, Let's Get Physical Flemingdon was featured as part of 101 Day, a one-day citywide event with Tai Chi, yoga, Zumba, and Bollywood dancing. There were physical activity demonstrations for different ages and activity levels. It was a great way to promote healthy activity for people to get moving and have fun. We have a program of ravine walks. These walks are a great way to introduce newcomers to our local ravines so that they can learn that ravines are a safe place to visit. With support from the Toronto Field Naturalists, some of our ravine walks have seen as large as 80 people. Our Ravine Leaders program has developed the capacity of residents to lead these ravine walks. Many newcomers in the community come with amazing skills. We work very hard to build the skills of individual leaders in our group. Our volunteers are so talented, and we recognize that with a little training, they may be able to apply some of the skills learned in shaping their community towards a new career. Now I will talk about 2 strategies that we use in our work. The first one is creating opportunities for people to connect over food. Food brings people together. Healthy food and sharing healthy recipes are an important part of FCSS's work. All events in the park involve food or snacks. For example, when we wanted feedback from the community about changes they wanted to see in the park, we organized an event called A Warm Winter Adventure that integrated a meal of soup and bread with community consultation and other activities to make the process fun, and so families did not have to worry about organizing a meal and going to the event. The Saturday Market, in partnership with the Thorncliffe Park Women's Association, along with vendor offerings, regularly provides healthy food cooking demonstrations using staples available from the food bank. Flemingdon Community Support Services offers training opportunities. This includes accreditation in food handling and CPR, which can help improve employment options. They also provide hands-on training workshops on food preparation and recipe development through the Flemingdon Community Health Center kitchen. This has provided women in the community with catering, training, and further opportunities in the community. A recipe book is in developing, highlighting favorite recipes. Another strategy is to recognize and address barriers to participation. The Flemingdon Park neighborhood has lots of green space, but before FCSS started programming in the park, much of it was underutilized. Initially, it was a challenge because much of the green space is in a hydro corridor and is spread out. But what we've learned is that the parks play a key role in providing a gathering space for the community. FCSS has been the spark for community change through programming in the park, which has created a healthy place for people from the community to gather and connect and build lasting relationships. People move to Flemingdon Park from all over the world with different cultures, languages, and ethnic backgrounds. The reason our work is so important is because parks are a place where people come together to create a new community to replace the one that they left behind. Parks are an essentially important gathering space for women who may have fewer opportunities to build relationships outside of the home. Our work in Flemingdon Park has been key to our vision of a strong and vibrant Flemingdon Park community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nawal. If anyone has any questions for Nawal, please ask them in the chat box. Great. Thanks again, Nawal, for your participation and for all you do for parks and for your community.
Thank you.
I'm going to talk about 3 key insights we have discovered from our Sparking Change research. So the first is that programming is key. A park is animated not just by its amenities. There needs to be a reason for people to come to the park and stay there and to engage with other people. The programming can include food, like Nawal talked about, arts, physical activity, or performance. It is important that the programming ideas tap into interests and energy of the surrounding local community. In Flemingdon Park, they have started off with 3 simple activities. And over the years, some of those activities have become core programs. But new programs and partnerships are always being explored, such as a partnership with TIFF or the Toronto International Film Festival for a movie in the park, and a partnership with the Toronto Arts Foundation for Arts in the Park programming. And the picture that you see there is a Japanese taiko art group that got funding from the Toronto Arts Foundation to do programming across the inner suburbs in Toronto. And so Flemingdon Park has been one of those communities for 3 years that has had professional artists perform in the park. The second key insight is that parks are gateways. Park engagement can be a gateway or a launching pad for people. Participating in a park activity can lead to wider civic involvement, further volunteering, and local economic development, as well as building skills for individuals, which Nawal talked about, like food handling and CPR, and expanding their professional networks. FCSS has used park programming as a launching pad for creating local training and economic development around food. The third and final key insight is that small is big. Big picture thinking is important in park engagement, but you need to bring people along, and it is the small wins and milestones that keep people excited and encourage others to get involved. Small programs are also more manageable and don't burn people out. The picture that you see there is 2 Russian seniors in the Bathurst Finch community in Toronto. And they have a native plant garden, and they try and encourage other seniors to come and help in the garden. Nawal mentioned that they started with 3 small events. But when I first met with Nawal and the Flemingdon Community Support Services, they wanted funding like a lot of groups do, and they wanted funding for a big multicultural festival. For a new group, a new fledgling group that's just getting started, big events can burn people out. And so what we encouraged them to do was to start with small events, which they did. They did a cleanup, they did a nature walk and exercises in the park. And so they got used to doing smaller events, and then they did their multicultural festival. And so they learned to do outreach and marketing and actually get their members used to programming. So what are next steps? What comes next? We want you to be able to come away from this webinar with some concrete ideas for what you can bring back to your city and community parks. Please feel free to share through the chat box again other thoughts as I make suggestions here. Okay, so before I start, so one of our problems, so this is Vanessa. And she says, one of our problems with allowing residents to grow gardens in parks is that our operations staff say, based on our experience, the groups eventually stop maintaining the gardens and they need to rip them out. Do you have experience that could assist with this? So this happens in all community gardens. I think all community program, you sort of have ebbs and flows. When you have engaged, also happens with schools. When you have committed people, you know, your programs and your community gardens are doing really great and are vital. And then you have a year where you don't have as much engagement, and that's when the city staff come in and want to turn the garden into grass, which is really sad. I mean, I have experienced it. And I would say that it is a process, and that it's a continuous work in process. And so it's not something that just happens overnight. I think you have to keep working. I will mention some things. Actually, let me go through these next steps, and then I think one of the steps we'll come to, and I might elaborate on that. So if you are a city staff or an elected representative, ensure that your parks are being planned with social activity in mind, as well as with an environmental and a health lens. So make sure that there's stewardship programs, health programs like walks, and consult with the community to find out what it is that they want. Re-examine policies that may create barriers, such as confusing and costly park permits, and rules that stifle local economic development activity in public spaces. And so maybe the community garden could be here, and maybe cities. This is for all the municipal staff that are on the call. This might be cities thinking about what to do about this problem. Let's see, Becky Ellis says, in Burlington, public community gardens are constructed and managed by the city on city property. Gardeners rent a plot. We have found this to be a successful model. So there's a good solution. Actually, if there's anyone on the call that can respond to the initial question, would be really helpful. And then Michael Rack says Winnipeg does the same thing. Okay, so another point for city staff is pair park improvements with community involvement. If a new park amenity or design upgrade is being planned, use public meetings to start a conversation and invite community members to take an ongoing role in the park. It's important to think about this before the upgrades happen, or else you lose that opportunity. Be open-minded and willing to test new ideas as pilot projects. In RV Burgess Park, the City of Toronto allowed for a tandoor oven to cater to the large South Asian population. And so a tandoor oven is similar to a bake oven, but it's for making naan. And so they decided that a bake oven wouldn't work in that community, but a tandoor oven would. And they worked with the city. It was a long process. It took 2 years to get it in the park, but now they have it, and they have like really vibrant events where they sell the naan for a quota, and people come and use the park in huge numbers. So here are some key insights. If you're a community member, So talk to your neighbors and ask them to join your existing group or to help you start a group. Reach out to already established groups to find out how you could work together. Start small. Do not underestimate the ability of small. And remember, small is big. Build on the skills and interest in your local neighborhood. Plan for group sustainability by focusing on structure and leadership. Identify a core volunteer group, but provide opportunities for others to join in ways that are meaningful and realistic for them. This is really important, and this could actually be a response for the community garden. Sustainability, you need sustainability for all your programs, park programs, community garden programs, and it's a challenge for most people. Or for most groups. So focusing on the structure and leadership, when you're getting started and when you're a small group, think about that long term. What is the structure of your group going to look like? What's the leadership going to look like? And then think about who you bring along and how you provide for opportunities for people in the community. Okay, so here are some ideas for nonprofit staff. Reach out and find those community leaders and offer assistance. Focus on capacity building. Ensure that groups are community-led. If you don't have the means to provide financial support, offer organizational support. Offer help with networking and community outreach or free meeting space. So that there are things that nonprofits have that are really useful for individuals. So think about what it is that as a nonprofit you can bring to individuals in your community. So, oops, sorry about that. Okay, so with those recommendations, we come to the end of this presentation. Let's see if there's any questions or suggestions. So Thea Silver says, great examples and insights here and great conversation beginning. Thanks, park people. For folks who want to continue to learn, share, connect, discuss around this topic or other matters of importance to communities, I'd like to encourage you to visit the Knowledge Center, launched recently by the Ontario Trillium Foundation for this very purpose. It's really a platform for community and nonprofits to leverage and drive. And she says, check it out. So maybe we will share that in the chat window. Oh, she did. Okay, so Thea's shared it with all of you. Okay. Oh, that's me there. And that's actually Flemingdon Park at one of your festivals, Nawal. Do you remember which one it was?
It was the first one that we did through Park People funding.
Ah, okay. So the Multicultural Festival, I think.
Yes, it was in October 18, 2014.
Oh, you're good with dates. Okay, so we are going to share our link to the Sparking Change report. So I shared some of the stories, Nawal's Flemingdon Community Support Services actually in the Sparking Change report. It's called the Flemingdon Urban Fair Committee because that's what their name was before they changed over. And so you'll hear Nawal's story, you'll hear all sorts of stories to connect to the different social impacts, and there's more strategies. So I do encourage you to look at the Sparking Change report, and we are going to share the link in the chat box. We also have lots of resources on park engagement in underserved communities on Park People's website. So if you go to parkpeople.ca and click on the resources, there's a resource on that pumpkin parade, on how to engage people in underserved communities, and all sorts of other resources. We're going to send a link to a survey. Your feedback is so critical in helping us design better webinars. This is a second in a series of 5. We also want to find out what your needs are and how we can better support you. So the survey, if you could fill out the survey, it would be really helpful. We want to thank you for joining us today and for participating. We hope this has been helpful. Thank you for sharing, and yeah, I think we have some time. So Rachel's saying if anyone has any questions on any of the contact for Nawal or myself, I think we have some time to answer some questions. Okay, so can you provide, I can't see the name, but it says, can you provide an example of when a municipality has got public engagement right for park master plans, park improvement, and what that public engagement has looked like? I don't know, but I may not also be the right person in the organization to answer this question. If there's any people from cities, municipalities across the country, if you have a response for that, if you've done any interesting engagement in parks before your capital projects, would you mind sharing some of that?
Can I say something?
Sure, Noel, go ahead.
So FCSS has worked with Play by Nature at the City of Toronto to do consultations in Flemingdon Park. If you know that we have a splash pad at 150 Grenoble, and we had community consultations to find out what the community really wanted in that park. That was one of the pieces that we did. You know, I spoke about the warm winter adventure where we had people from the community come in over soup and bread, and that's where we did the consultation for the splash pad. And also we had community consultation in what people wanted to see in Flemingdon Park. We had several consultations, and we used to provide food so that people didn't have to worry about feeding their children in the evening. They used to come, and through surveys and focus groups, we were able to you know, find out what they were looking for in the park. So in Flemingdon Park, where we have most of our events, it doesn't have great lighting. So that was one thing that came out of it. And they also wanted shaded structures where they could gather and, you know, have picnics or get-togethers and things like that. So we have been part of community consultations with the city as well as with other groups.
Noel, could you ask you a question? So
Yes.
You did those consultations a couple of years ago. Have those programs been implemented, or the amenities been implemented?
The splash pad has been renovated, so that's done. And the shade structure that the community wanted to see, TCAT, which is the Center for Active Transportation, Toronto Center for Active Transportation, they did not have enough money to put up the structure, but they did. They had a small amount of money, and the other problem was that this park is in the hydro corridor, so you cannot have any permanent fixtures, but they did have a movable structure, and we did launch it in the park. And they are requesting for more funds in order to be able to do something concrete, but at least we have information and knowledge as to what the community needs in that park.
Great, thank you. Okay, so Ali Canning, piggyback on existing events so people don't have to make time for an engagement event only. Child mining or activities for kids also reduces barriers. Yes, so Ali, that's a great point. And I do want to mention that those strategies are actually in the Sparking Change report. There's lots of strategies in the Sparking Change report. We couldn't cover them all, but those are in the Sparking Change report. But thank you for bringing that up. Okay, so anyone else have any more questions? If you could type them up really quickly in the chat box. We have eight more minutes, so we do have some time if people have any questions. While we're waiting for that, I will maybe Oh, here, okay, here. So this is Doug Bennett, and Doug Bennett works for the City of Toronto in the Partnerships Office, I believe. So recent park engagement successes. Birksea Park, oh, that's right. So Birksea Park in Toronto, this is a dog fountain park. If you live in Toronto, you've heard of this park. And if you don't, you may have heard about it already. So this is the famous architect, and I forget his name. Doug, if you want to throw in his name in the chat box, that'd be great. So I believe they had consultations and came up with that wonderful dog fountain. The architect is Claude Comier from Montreal, and he's done some great work. So the Regent Park Aquatic Center, which is now called the Pam McConnell Aquatic Center in Toronto, in Regent Park, McGregor Playground, Corktown Common, which is another wonderful park in Toronto, and has lots of environmental features, and in many park projects with public engagement listed here. So Doug has shared a link. He shared it with all of you, so you have that there. You can look at some of the great things that they've done in the City of Toronto. If anyone else has really information like that from across the country, we'd love to hear from you. Thanks for that, Doug. That's really helpful. Okay, another question from Ali Canning. Has anyone successfully moved a pilot project into a standing program? What does that look like? I'm sure there's some in the Sparking Change report, and I can't think of them off the top of my head. If anyone's out there and has a pilot project that has been turned into a program. And we can, Ali, if we don't get an answer to this, maybe we'll look it up when we're offline and get back to you. So this is not the end. We hope that this is the beginning of a Sparking Change conversation, because this work is so important. And so please reach out. You can reach out. I don't think my email is on here, but you can find me on the Park People website, or if you just connect with info@parkpeople.ca, they'll connect to me. I'd love to find out the work that the Sparking Change work you're doing across the country, and how we can network on Sparking Change and in the work that's happening in underserved communities across the country. Okay, so this slide is the next few webinars. We've got a series of what we call Park Perspectives webinars on best practices for city parks. So Wednesday, October 17th, a close look at Montreal's Mont-Royal Park. November 14th, park governance, nonprofits and municipalities working together to manage parks. And on December 12th, parks as a safe landing place for newcomers. And so this is a look at Maybell Art's approach to community art. So this is that first picture that I talked about, where they had the programming with Syrian refugees. And Maybell is a really great community arts-based organization. So we really encourage you, same time as this webinar, 2 o'clock Eastern. There's a comment here. This is from, sorry, I don't see your name. I'm working on a project in Kitchener that involves many of the pieces that have been discussed throughout this webinar. It's called the Neighborhood Nature Play Project. Okay, and you've shared it with all the panelists. That's great. So it looks like it's an evergreen connected project. Would love to find out more about that. So we are going to ask you to please fill out the survey. Oh, I did talk about that. So just another reminder to please fill out the survey. And And we are. So I'm going to say thank you so much for joining us today and for participating. A huge thank you to Nawal. She was away till Monday, out of the country, and she sort of jumped in and did this. So we really appreciate that, Nawal.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much for providing me with this opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you to all of you that are doing Sparking Change work across the country. We appreciate all the work you're doing, and we want to hear more from you. Keep in touch.